find here in Isaiah 47:1, it says, "Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground, there is no throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate." And so it seems as if Babylon at one point, and while they were not a godly nation, it seems as if they were usable, at least by God, and God was able to direct them. And so there was some aspect there. And he described them here potentially earlier on as tender and delicate, which we don't know about Babylon to be that way because of how they actually went and were pretty cruel at times. And yet, so we see here God dealing with them. And in verse 2, it says, "Take the millstones and grind meal, uncover thy locks, make bare the leg, uncover the thigh, pass over the rivers. Thy nakedness shall be uncovered, yea, thy shame shall be seen. I will take vengeance, and I will not meet thee as a man." And so he's basically saying here that I'll meet you as God in my power, in my strength, and I will bring shame to you. I will cause you basically to have to work hard and labor to survive for food, and your nakedness will be uncovered to your shame, and you're going to become a shameful people, not a people that obviously had power and had power from God. God gave them tremendous strength and ability. And we're just reminded here of what God can do in someone's life that begins to get proud and arrogant and then is not merciful. If you flip over to Ezekiel 25, God does this with a few nations that we see he uses to deal with Israel. Egypt is a great example, how blessed Egypt was when they did right by God and were right to God's people. But when they became arrogant and harsh, they stopped listening to God. God dealt with them harshly, and really Egypt was destroyed over that in the Exodus. But in Ezekiel 25, verse 15, here's the Philistines actually in reference to the same type of thing, as God would use them. And we know that especially in the period of the Judges, God would use them, but then they would go too far. Anyway, in Ezekiel 25:15, it says, "Thus saith the Lord God, because the Philistines have dealt by revenge and have taken vengeance with a despiteful heart to destroy it for the old hatred. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will stretch out mine hand upon the Philistines, and I will cut off the cherethims and destroy the remnant of the seacoast, and I will execute great vengeance upon them with furious rebukes, and they shall know that I am the Lord when I shall lay my vengeance upon them." But it talks about the old hatred here, right? So a despiteful heart, old hatred. So basically it's stuff that they would not let go, and they remembered. And then when they had opportunity, when the tables were turned and they had the upper hand, they used their exorbitant force to bring forth pain and suffering to those that they had problems with. So in verse 4, it's an interesting passage to have inserted here. It says, back in our text, by the way, we're back in Isaiah 47, verse 4. It says, "As for our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel." It inserts here the Redeemer, the Lord, and then in just a minute it'll show that vengeance belongeth to God, not to man. But here in this text, as it mentions him, go ahead and continue to read here in verse number 5. It says, "Sit thou silent and get thee into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called the Lady of Kingdoms." So it's obvious that God is no longer going to use them. They're not usable. They take things too far. They allow power and position to go to their head, and then they ultimately use that power and position to punish and to wreak havoc on those that they have problems with in the old hatred. Even I'm reminded of our political system today and how, FBI, CIA, the whole Justice Department gets used, and it's being proven now and actually shown in report after report that they're weaponized, as they would use that term, and used against political enemies. And we see this all over the world in different countries that do this. When one group wins, they basically slaughter the other, and they use the police, they use the the judicial system and the prison systems, and they make the dissidents pay, and pay harshly. And God is basically saying here in this text that he is not going to be party to that. And so he calls them to sit silent. He tells Babylon to consider this and to get thee into darkness, right? Just this place of solitude to consider what was going on. Now, verse number 6 says this: I was wroth with my people. I have polluted mine inheritance. I have given them into thy hand. He says, thou didst show them no mercy. Upon the ancient hast thou very heavily laid thy yoke. It says, thou saidst, I shall be a lady forever, so that thou didst not lay these things to thy heart, neither didst remember the latter end of it. Therefore hear now this, thou that art given to pleasures, that dwellest carelessly, that sayest in thine heart, I am, and none else besides me. By the way, which is a tremendous statement here. If you say in your heart, I am, remember the only one that am in that context is God. And so basically he's saying, he's charging Babylon here with becoming God themselves and thinking that the tables can't be turned. And the reality is that our life can change in an instant. And for now, yeah, you may be under bad bondage from somebody and all that, and at some point you may end up on top. I think of Joseph. I mean, he was in Potiphar's house and he was treated wrong. Would he then take vengeance on Potiphar's house later when he became in charge? We don't see that happening. That's a good thing, but he could have. And so when you're in a place of power, just know that at any moment, in just a short turn of events, you can be the one under somebody else's power. I saw this at work a lot, where there was a saying that went around, be careful, you never know who might be the next boss. And that is absolutely true in a lot of contexts, that you just don't know. And that's part of the reason why you need to be merciful to people, but really because God is watching. That's the big reason why we need to be merciful to people and not abuse the power and strength that we have in position and make people pay and not have mercy on others, because we just don't understand all that goes into this. But God is watching. The tables may be turned at one point, and we just want to be careful. He says here, he charged Babylon here in verse number 8 with dwelling carelessly and saying in their heart, I am, and none else besides me. I shall not sit as a widow, neither shall I know the loss of children. He's saying, you think it's always going to be this way. You think you're always going to be in strength. The reality is that weakness will most likely come. Verse 9, but these two things shall come to thee in a moment, in one day, the loss of children and widowhood. They shall come upon thee in their perfection. Now we know Babylon in one day was taken down by the Medes and Persians, and it happened quickly. They lost all their power, all their strength, and were placed under another. And so this prophecy was fulfilled. And then he says this. He says, for the multitude of thy sorceries and for the great abundance of thine enchantments, for thou hast trusted in thy wickedness, that thou hast said, none seeth me. Thy wisdom and thy knowledge, it hath perverted thee. And thou hast said in thine heart, I am, and none else beside me. So they lifted themselves up to be as God. They then heaped unto themselves and brought unto themselves strange gods, false gods. They took their gold and their silver and they made idols and gods out of them. The previous chapter speaks of this, and they didn't keep in mind that it is God that raises up, and it is God that sets people down. And God was watching, and they considered not that one bit, and ultimately for that, he would then, God said he would then remove them. If you even recall Nebuchadnezzar earlier on in Babylon, he actually built an image, and that image would be of himself, and it would show himself as strong and powerful. And then he would have everyone fall down and worship him. And for that, God removed Nebuchadnezzar for that time and made him an ox in the field so that he would understand that it's God that raiseth up and it's God that sets down. And so verse 11 says, therefore shall evil come upon thee. Thou shalt not know from whence it riseth, and mischief shall fall upon thee. Thou shalt not be able to put it off, and desolation shall come upon thee suddenly, which thou shalt not know. It's just going to come suddenly. Verse number 12 go on, it talks about how God, has a way of dealing with idolatry, and then in a sense challenging the gods in our lives, so that they're removed and that we're left without power. Verse 12 says, stand thou with thine enchantments and with the multitude of thy sorceries, wherein thou labored from thy youth. If so be, thou shalt be able to profit. If so be, thou mayest prevail. Think of the challenges that God gives to false gods, and really to people that hold up false gods. We know with Elijah and Israel in that day, where all the prophets were challenged and fire fell down, and Elijah's God, Jehovah, devoured the sacrifice, but yet their gods could do nothing. And that's how God works. Whether we have false gods or not, it's not the false god that provides power. Time and chance happens to all, and at times we do find ourselves in positions of power. It's in those times that sometimes people act like that strength came from their false gods, but it didn't. And so God will challenge that and show that they have no power at all. And even Jesus, when standing before Pontius Pilate, Pilate said to Jesus, don't you know I have power to crucify thee? And Jesus said, you'd have no power at all, except it were given thee from above. And so that power didn't come from Rome. That power didn't come from wisdom and knowledge and the power of of false gods. The power that Pilate stood in was from God, and God could remove it in an instant, and ultimately did, even in reference to Rome. So verse 13 says, thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsels. Let now the astrologers, the stargazers, the monthly prognosticators stand up and save thee from these things that shall come upon thee. Behold, they shall be as stubble. The fire shall burn them, and they shall not deliver themselves from the power of the flame. There shall not be a coal to warm at, nor fire to sit down or to sit before it. Thou shalt verse 15, thus shalt thou be unto them whom thou hast labored, even thy merchants from thy youth. They shall wander, every one to his quarter. None shall save thee. And so all of this just shows us that we need to be careful not to take offense, careful not to become, bitter, careful not to be arrogant, careful when we're raised up and have strength and power, careful not to abuse that power, careful to always remember mercy. And as ye would that men should do unto you, do ye also unto them. And so just keeping that in mind. And when we get the upper hand in someone's life, we just need to understand that God has put us there to be a help and not to be a hurt. If we become cruel in our interactions with others, God might just turn the tables on us. And before we know it, we're the ones that are under hard bondage, and it gets turned on our own heads. If there's ever to be vengeance to be meted out, we need to let God do that. God has not given that part to us. And if God ever uses us as an instrument of correction in someone's life, we need to be careful that, but by the grace of God, we are who we are, and that we could be in that same place in a moment and in an instant. And if we'll remember mercy and operate in this fashion, then God can continue to use us. But if we begin to take vengeance and we begin to have hurts and all that permeate, and then when we have position, we take it out on others, in our own families, with our children, with our spouses, with people around us in our church and at work, in society. If we become that, then God will put us down, and he is no respecter of persons in this. And so just something to keep in mind. We see it over and over in the scriptures, and we need to remember we stand in a place of vulnerability, and as we have power, we have to do right with that power, else God will have to deal with us then, and sometimes it becomes very harsh. So